Okay, Mike. I'm trying to read some more of that book from Robert. Monroe. I'm very tired. So, I think about actually start reading my book that I'm writing. And maybe that's the best solution to a lot of things. And tied in with some of my own music and some of my own images. So you guys will be able first to hear my book. Then I got to figure out how to publish it. I've got 10,000 pages, words, 10,000 words, and the first part of my book. My first encounter and all the things that I saw, and then I'll start type on my second part of the book, and I imagine it's going to be at least 10,000 words, and this is talking about a 3-day period. So, Robert A. Monroe, A Journey Out of the Body, and I'm so fucking tired. Okay. Premises and rationale. Part of the reason I'm so tired is sleep patterns been screwed up a little bit from starting to write, and I ate a ton of ice cream yesterday or last night, so shame on me. It's not good for my MS, but it was there, and being the addict that I am, you put a pile of ice cream in front of my face, especially if it's chocolate mint chip ice cream, I'm going to eat that damn thing. So, alright. So, I know I have been so disciplined about my diet for months, over a year. I think it was until a couple months ago was the first time I had some ice cream. And this was back in September. And now me and my son go shopping. We go a couple times a month to go shopping for food. I'm dumb enough to buy that ice cream and all the other junk food, and I'm going to eat it. And I got to get back to being disciplined of my primarily diet of carnivore diet, a little bit of veggies and fruit. Lost a lot of weight that way, and now I'm probably gaining it all back from eating the ice cream and the chocolate. Of course, it's been Halloween, and then there'll be another excuse would be Christmas. I don't celebrate either one of those things. So, but it's there, and the idea is constantly there, and so being the weak person that I am. And of course, by the time you guys see this reading, I had read The Synchronicity, Through the Eyes of Science, Myth, and the Trickster. So you see that. Very few of you have probably will watch that, which is fine. It's not really the important thing is me to keep on reading and reading out loud, because I really don't have anybody to talk to, and if I don't do these readings out loud, I notice that my ability to not only read but to speak out loud has been being compromised. So this is, believe it or not, part of my health program. So, premises and rationale. For those who are knowledgeable in the humanities, and the material contained herein may seem to be the continuation of a line of thought that has persisted for thousands of years, and so it is. Why then does it become important now? The important response is that the material has not come from readings or studies of the past. Rather, it has been and is taking place in the mid-20th century. Comparison came from the fact if validity does exist here, it is possible that modern technology, through serious organized investigation and research into the second body postulate, could provide mankind with a quantum jump as great or greater than the Copernican revolution. It could be the crack that becomes a door, that becomes the gateway that opens into a new era in man's history. Premise and scope of existing man. Partially because of our intensely materialistic society, we may become accustomed and conditioned to the concept that the human entity ultimately lies within the bounds of the physical body. Therefore, the periphery of the living human entity, the rim of the area which it affects and is affected by it, extends beyond the physical and the conscious mind. The composition of this area is neither material nor motor, but of thought and emotion. The transmission and reception of affecting data is continuous and operating at both the conscious and the non-conscious level during every living moment, awake or asleep. Data received by the human entity is in this matter can be beneficial and destructive according to the interpretation put up upon by it. According to the interpretation put upon it by the non-conscious mind. Reactions to this constant data input may be found in the varying mental and physical states of the individual. For example, the periphery extends as far as a distant friend. The friend thinks of you objectively and emotionally, unaccountably at the very same moment. He comes to your mind without a related memory associated to suggest or trigger the response. This takes place so casually and so frequently that we are unaware of its significance. Compound this with the almost infinite complexities and variations in the present and past human relationships of the individual. Only then can one begin to perceive the volume and diversity of the data. The Christian ethic seems to be an attempt to explain this fact in a non-objective parallel. The thoughts of you impressed upon you by neighbor, friends, and enemy significantly affect your mental self. And the thought this channel are the mental self, and through this channel are reflected in the physical body. It becomes clear, too, that the individual with wide continuing experience in human relationships will receive a greater affecting input directly in proportion to such experience. For the leaders of the world who are exposed to input from millions charged with emotions, either benign or malignant, the burden is incalculable. Consider, too, what you engender in others through thus feeds back. Gosh, consider to what you are engendered in others, thus feeds back to you. Try to visualize an individual nerve network extending from you to every person you have met. Signals, thoughts, and constantly travel along this network to and from you, and from those who think of you frequently, consistently, or otherwise. There extends a strong and well-circulated channel of communication. At the other end of the frequency are those who make and think of you perhaps once each year. Examine the totality of individuals that you have met and known, as well as many you may have affected knowingly, and you may begin to appreciate the probable sources of the many non-objective signals influencing you at a given moment. The quality of the signals evidently varies greatly based principally upon the degree of emotion present during transmission. The more intense the emotion, the greater the signal intensity. The question of good or bad does not alter the quality of the transmission. The converse works in precisely the same fashion. You transmit those of whom you think, and they are affected by what you think. Think, in quotes, here refers to those mental actions almost wholly on non-conscious level, chiefly emotional and subjective in nature. When this kind of transmission and reception takes place consciously or unwillfully, it is labeled telepathy. Much is still unknown. Do reception and transmission increase tenfold during sleep? Does the effect increase when the human entity dies? Does it extend to animals? For every answer, 100 questions are left unanswered. Yet, this is the first step in an expanded concept of the physical life experience, premise or reality of second state existence. Many, if not all, living human beings have a second body. For reasons yet unknown, many, if not all, human beings temporarily separate from the physical bodies, their physical bodies via this second body during sleep. This is done without conscious memory except in rare instances. Far more rare are those instances when separation is obtained with conscious intent. However, the latter case poses some startling statistics and probabilities. It is inconceivable that one experimental ability is unique. If one person can transform this dissociative action, there must be others now living who can do the same, and probably more effectively. But how many others are there? Can one person in 1,000 do it? In 10,000? And 100,000? In 1,000,000? Let us assume that only one person in 1,000,000 can perform in such body constantly and consciously. This means that as of this moment, there are more than 35,000 human beings now living who can operate in the second body, probably better than I can. Such a group, if organized, can control the destiny of mankind. Which leads to the question, are any of them organized now? And do they now control our destiny? We should take a break. I'm feeling very hot. Getting with this 55-year-old man getting a hot flash. What the heck? Alright, so let's look back. It says such groups, if organized, could control the destiny of mankind. Which leads to the question, are any of them organized now? And do they now control our destiny? Before dismissing this as an absurdity, consider that I was able to affect another living human being physically in the pinching episode. If one can do this, so can others. Nothing more than a pinch at the right time, at the right place in the physical body of another human being could change the world. It takes a little imagination to visualize a cerebral artery in the brain as the cause of a stroke in a world leader, or a life-saving pinch in a hemorrhaging brain artery of another. All that is needed is the ability and intent. If there are restraints or deterrents to such possible action, they are not apparent. Further, a person operating in the second body can affect other human beings mentally. How much and what matter is still uncertain. However, the experiments show that it can be done. Such effects may show in nothing more than sleep disturbances. They could result in unaccounted for compulsions, fear, neurosis, and irrational actions. From the data, it would seem that no more is needed than perfected techniques to systematically accomplish this at will. Perhaps this, too, has already been done. A willful use of the second body then potentially yields power so great that the other means are helpless against it. People wielding this power might well be able to suppress or divert any serious expanded study into this area of knowledge. If history is any indication, something has already retarded growth in this direction. First, it was a wall of ignorance. Next came a veil of superstition. Today, a double barrier exists: the suspicion of organized religion and the derision of recognized science. And on the other hand, the use of such power may be under the control and direction of an animate, intelligent, and impersonal regulators, and may preclude non-constructive interference. There are some indications that this may be the case. We can only hope that it is. Let us assume then that sophisticated man will undertake serious research of the second body. One by one, others will learn the techniques, and the reality will become generally accepted. What then? First, man will be freed of all uncertainty of his relationship with God. His position relative to nature and the universe will be unequivocal knowledge. He will know rather than believe whether death is a passing or finality. With such knowledge, expanded experience, religious conflict will be impossible. Quite probably Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and Buddhists, etc., will still retain much of their individuality, knowing that each has its place in the locale too. However, each will at last understand how this is possible, and that there are infinite variations in the spectrum. Each will rationalize by saying, "That's what we have been trying to tell you all along." Prayer techniques may be rediscovered. Knowledge rather than belief could alter the procedure vitally. Man would then proceed systematically with his preparation for life in the locale 2 on sound basis, liberated from misinterpretation of distorted visions subjectively experienced and or observed by uninformed and relatively uneducated fanatics many centuries ago. In so doing, he may have to face facts both unpalatable and uncomfortable. Traditional concepts of good and bad, right and wrong, would undoubtedly be subject to radical redefinition. Truth may indeed hurt for a generation or two. The practice of medicine would be seriously affected. Recognition of a possible relationship between the physical and the second body would greatly influence the purely mechanical method of diagnosis and treatment. The exact relationship of the second body to the physical body is not now known, but there is much to suspect. The growing results of the practice of psychosomatic medicine provide an additional clue. It is challenging to think of scientific precision in these fields. Psychology and psychiatry would soon be unrecognizable under the impact of the second state data. This area of human knowledge would be even more greatly affected than religion. Definitions of neurosis, psychosis, unconscious, superego, id, may have to be revisited and discarded. Earlier indications are that actual causes of mental illness may be uncovered rather than conclusively diagnosed on the basis of insufficient theory. It may well be that many of those labeled schizophrenic suffer from some sort of disease of the second body. From the viewpoint of the second body, a physical, conscious, and awake human being who simultaneously receives impressions of locale 2 through some imperfection or cause yet unknown might well be unable to absorb this input of double reality. The voices so many psychotics reported here may indeed be very real. Catatonia may be the simple effect of the disassociation of the second body on some unusual basis, as one would leave a house with all the automatic equipment running and forget to return. The hallucinations of persecution by the paranoid may be very real interference from boundary layer subhuman species in the local of 2. The result of some inadvertent breakdown inadvertent breakdown in the barrier in a particular case. The workings of the mind itself, the automatic system operation, the actual brain function, the relationship to the superconscious soul or spirit, all may become common knowledge under the new concept. Advanced states in consciousness such as have been proclaimed by mystics, philosophers, and the trippers might become a daily achievement for those who so desire and can handle them. All of these possibilities are mild by comparison to the upheaval that would take place in the daily lives of every human being if the second body concept became accepted fact. First, the sleeping third of our 24-hour living schedule would no longer be unfathomable. Perhaps we would still term it sleep, but at least we would know what we are doing. On the limited evidence, sleep is first of all a recharging process. This may be performed by a dissociation of the second body quite automatically in varying degrees of distance. In one case, it might separate only a fraction of an inch. In other such distances may be limitless by our physical standards of measurement. How such separation can act as regenerate is not yet known. Nor is it known why some take distant trips or visits while others remain close to the physical. There seems to be two explanations of what we now call dreams. First, the common dream may be some computer-type action of the unconscious in sorting out recently perceived data. Second, there are vividly recalled experiences, now called dreams, which may actually be impressions received by the second body while traveling in the release state. There may be many other varieties or subclassifications yet to be termed. Only research in this direction will determine this. In any event, our luxurious and frightening period called sleep will be understood for what it truly is. The result may be an adjustment of our sleep needs. Perhaps only 2 hours out of 24 will be needed with this new understanding. New studies may even show that 5 minutes of deliberate sleep every hour is far more efficient method of recharging. 8 hour night cycle 8 hour night cycle could be nothing more than the habitual result of environment. Second state studies should resolve such questions. Premise: the existence of a third force. This is the energy means by which the second body operates and is quite probably fundamental in the thought process. It is not known whether the force is generated by living entities or is an ever-present field force, modulated in some manner by such beings. It does, however, have some notable characteristics. It bears a distinct relationship to electricity and magnetism. It might be conceived of a third of a triad, which is cyclic. And electricity is to magnetism as magnetism is to force X, as force X is to electricity. Hence the label third force, which I did not originate. The trinity of our theologies may have begun when this was common knowledge in ages past, and subsequently distorted in the retelling. Given this interaction with electricity and magnetism, it seems probable that the existence of part one of the triad creates secondary and tertiary patterns among the other two. So it may be that when we think we are utilizing this third force, which then is the only slightly represented in purely electrical or magnetic form, it is presumed that this third force action can be detected and measured by instruments already developed. To date, this has not been attempted in a serious, consistent study. On the other hand, there is no evidence that strong applications of electricity and magnetism or any combinations of electromagnetic radiation generate significant amounts of the third force. They do, however, appear to act upon the latter in much the same manner as light is affected. Experiments with the only known transducer, the human mind, shows consciousness consistently trying to symbolize this third force in terms of electricity and vibration. It sees and feels electric conductors, flashes, and often actual physical shock in attempting to translate this energy field into known experience. In one test, as noted, a dissociation and movement in the second body was attempted from within a charged Faraday cage, where the physical body was completely surrounded by a strong DC electrical field. It was found that the movement through the charged walls of the cage while in the second body was impossible. With the charge removed, there was no problem. In early stages of experimentation, attempts to move any distance in the second body were restricted by what seemed to be an interlacing barrier of power cables and lines overhead, much like those found in so many streets in older cities and towns. One of the factors in extension of distance from the physical body lay in recognizing the nature of this barrier and its relationship to electromagnetic radiation. The mind, perceiving such forces for the first time, interpreted them as wires. Only identified passages through the barrier became relatively simple. The correlation is also indicated by the reported experience of the second bodies positioned over the street, later confirmed by physical inspection, and moving along the magnetic field of higher voltage primary power line overhead. Whenever encountered during this second state, third force manifestation has been perceived and interpreted first as electricity. Today, there is no proven method of measurement or detection of this third force, and there will not be until the possibility of the existence of this third in the Trinity is seriously considered. This reality is a concept of proportions inconceivable to the conscious human mind. Yet all experiments inescapably point to this conclusion. It is not difficult to recognize Locale 2 as the subject of man's dreams and contemplations throughout history, nor is it difficult to understand the varying patterns ascribed to it and the countless attempts to translate this great unknown in recognizable terms. From the present evidence, it can truly be both heaven and hell, just as our present environment can be. The most important factor seems to be that the greater part of Locale 2 is really neither of the two. It is not known from the experiments to date whether everyone who dies automatically goes to Locale 2. Also, there is no present evidential material to indicate that the presence of a human personality in Locale 2 is permanent. It may be that, like an eddy or vortex, we gradually lose energy and eventually dissipate into Locale 2 medium once we leave Locale 1. Here now. It is conceivable that the result of this process would grant recognition of immortality and that we survive the grave, but not further. Perhaps the stronger the formation of personality, the longer the life in this different state of being. Thus, it could be that survival is both reality and illusion. The scope of Locale 2 seems limitless under the conditions encountered thus far. There seems to be no means to measure or calculate the breadth and depth of this strange familiar place. Movement from section to section is too instantaneous to allow any estimates or to observe relative spatial positions of one area to another. As far as can be ascertained, there is no conjunctive relationship between places in Locale 2 and this physical universe. They may or may not coincide side to side. Certainly, this non-material realm does not have as its center of Earth upon which we live. Okay. Rather, it would seem that one very small portion envelops our physical world and thus is our port of entry. At this stage, I believe it is impossible for human consciousness to comprehend fully the reality of Locale 2. It would be like asking a computer to work on an analogous. What am I saying? A work to an analogy. That's not analogous. For which it has not been programmed. Consciousness, as we have developed it to date, is not prepared for this kind of comprehension. This is not to say, however, that such consciousness cannot or will not be forthcoming. By training in now observed and yet to be formulated techniques, consciousness might well be deepened and expanded to recognize and accept this reality. On the other hand, I am quite sure that the subconscious, unconscious, superconscious, superego soul, or whatever our non-material non-consciousness is called, is generally quite aware of and familiar with Locale 2. How much this awareness affects our conscious thought has been contemplated by our most reverend philosophers. Many suggest that it dominates our waking actions. The records of the experiments seem to bear this out. We are masters of ourselves, but not at the conscious level. Our actions in Locale 2 may be forceful bearing on our daily activities, completely unrecognized by the conscious self. There are literally hundreds of pages of experimental notes relating to Locale 2's visits, most of which are still beyond translation into Locale 1 thought patterns. Undoubtedly, most of them also deal with that portion which attracts this personal self, like attracts like, which is but a fraction of the whole premise, the existence of a contradiction. We share with animals and all living things a common prime command, going back to the moments of conception. It supersedes any other instinct. The command undeniably etches in our being is survive. Self-preservation, or survive. It was this dynamic that created the fear barrier which had to be overcome before willful separation could take place. For an out-of-body experience was very much like death, which might be called the ultimate failure to comply with the command. To satisfy the survival drive, we eat. We often eat compulsively, but it is one way to respond to the prime command when threatened with something other than starvation. We translate the command into accumulation and defense of material possessions. The drive to reproduce answers the command in another manner. Any danger of the ego calls forth the automatic mechanism of death or denial. The familiar fight to flee is the physical reaction to the survival imprint. Survival is the prime command, as the prime command means avoidance of death by whatever method available. The contradiction is that the principal idealistic notions of man, the noble virtues and the great actions, all have as their base the denial and or rejection of the prime command. The man who gives to another his bread, who provides for his family at the cost of early death, who gives himself to the community and country without direct benefit, who deliberately endangers and possibly sacrifices his life for others, has done the right thing. Therefore, doing the right thing, the human action most respected, the most godlike by our standards, is the direct violation of God's prime command to all nature. Moreover, to compound the contradictions, it is impossible to achieve the second state without subjugation and or subordination of the survival drive in its most basic forms. In DNA, however, you have the wires crossed. From these fundamentals, 1,000 secondary premises come to the surface like bubbles rising from the primordial mass below the organic rubble on the ocean floor. Through layers upon layers of sedimentary misconception, they seep upward into the light. It is better to burn the evidence or to ignore it. Is it better to burn the evidence or to ignore it? Or, with all the existing potentials, to try to widen the doorway? With the latter comes this probability. In the year 2025, a boy in a locale 1 pushes the button on a device much like a portable radio. I perceive the signal and turn my attention to him. "Hi there, son," I greet him warmly. My great-great-grandchild smiles in recognition. Okay. That was the end of chapter 21 of Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe. I got a little bit more here. I'll just get it out of the way. The 9960 night. I was laying in a north-south position when I suddenly felt bathed in and transfixed by a very powerful beam that seemed to come from the north, about 30 degrees above the horizon. I was completely powerless, with no will of my own, and felt as if I were in the presence of a very strong force and personal contact with it. It had intelligence of a form beyond my comprehension. It came directly down the beam into my head and seemed to be searching every memory of my mind. I was truly frightened because I was powerless due to anything about this intrusion. This intelligence force entered my head just above the forehead and offered no calming thoughts or words. It didn't seem to be aware of any of my feelings or emotions. It was looking impersonally, hurriedly, and definitely for something specific in my mind. After a while, perhaps only a moment, it left and I reintegrated, arose and shaken, and went outside for some fresh air. 9/16/60 night. Same impersonal probing, the same power from the same angle. However, this time I received a firm impression that I was inextricably bound by loyalty to this intelligence force, always had been, and that I had a job to perform here on earth. The job was not necessarily to my liking, but I was assigned to it. The impression was that I was manning a pumping station, and that it was a dirty, ordinary job, but it was mine, and I was stuck with it. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could alter the situation. I got the impression of huge pipes, so ancient they were covered with undergrowth and rust. Something like oil was passing through them, but it was much higher in energy than oil, and virtually needed and valued elsewhere. Oh, Luce, are we talking about the beginnings of his assumption not to this material planet? This has been going on for eons of time, and there were other force groups here taking out the same material on some highly competitive basis. The material was convertible to at some distance point and civilization for something very valuable to entities far above my ability to understand. Again, the intelligent force moved out and away quickly, and the visitation ended. I got up after a bit, feeling depressed, and went into the bathroom in our house and actually felt I should wash my hands after working, although my hands were clean. A 9:30-60 night. Same pattern as 9:16. Again, there was the feeling of being the pump station attendant, the approach of the entity down the beam, the search of my mind, this time even to see what specifically controlled my breathing apparatus. I seemed to understand that the entity was looking for some substance that might permit breathing in Earth atmosphere. A picture was shown in my mind of a pouch, possibly of 2 or 3 inches and 1 inch thick, hung on a belt at the waist, with the statement, "This is how we are breathing now." This gave me courage to try truly to communicate. I mentally orally also asked who they were and received an answer that I could not translate or understand. Then I felt them beginning to leave. I asked for some actual indication that they had been there, but was rewarded only with partial amusement. Then they seemed to soar up into the sky while I called after them, pleading. Then I was sure that their mentality and intelligence were far beyond my understanding. It is an impersonal, cold intelligence with none of the emotions of love and compassion which we respect so much. Yet this may be the omnipotence we call God. Visits such as these in mankind's past could well have been the basis for all of our religious beliefs. Our knowledge today could provide no better answers than we could 1,000 years past. By this time, it was getting light, and I sat down and cried great deeps of sobs as I have never cried before, because then I knew without any qualification or future hope of change that the God of my childhood, of the church, and of religion throughout the world was not as we worshipped him to be, and that for the rest of my life I would suffer the loss of this illusion. Are we then just leftover laboratory rats? Or perhaps the experiment is still in process? That's the end of chapter 20. And that was probably the best part of the whole damn book for me, right there. Is that, I'm glad I persevered. The last 2 pages. Yeah.
You're going to try, go all the way. Otherwise, don't even start. If you're going to try, go all the way. This could mean losing girlfriends, wives, relatives, jobs, and maybe your mind.
Don't know, you should take it slow. Are you searching?